A huge monolith structure was surrounded by high walls. There was security at the entrance and heavily armed soldiers on the walls. Even though this was only an F-rank dungeon, it made up for millions of dollars of revenue every day, with a large number of people entering, clearing the monsters, and selling the resources they received inside. This monolith had a blue color, indicating it was a normal dungeon with little danger of a dungeon break. If the color changed to orange and then to red, it meant a dungeon break was imminent. Regularly cleaning the dungeon kept the color at blue, turning it into a treasure trove with capable people farming it. You always had casualties every now and then from hunters that were either too full of themselves, bad teammates, or just plain unlucky. I sincerely hoped I didn't land in the category of being too full of myself. As I gathered my wits, I showed the guards at the metal entrance of the enclosure my hunter ID before I headed in. Inside the walls, there were a few hunter teams getting their gear in order or just talking. A few people were standing around looking to either form parties or invite others to their party. At the center of the blue monolith, there was a square, door-like structure. This door-like structure was how one entered the dungeon. Those in a group would have to touch the door to be transferred to the first floor of the dungeon together. There was a party prepared to go into the dungeon in front of me already, so I reined in my curiosity about the other hunters around me. I stood a few feet away from the ingoing party. It didn't take long before a few hunters noticed me waiting by myself.
Hey, is that kid thinking of going in alone?
One of the hunters scoffed at me.
Another one with a death wish.
Another hunter sneered in my direction.
Just ignore him. Who knows? Maybe he's one of those prodigies that can solo an F-rank dungeon,
said another. Ignoring the laughs around me, I waited patiently as the entire party in front of me disappeared in a flash. I waited the required minute before going forward and placing my hand on the square door. In an instant, I was transported into a large cavern where I had just caught the attention of two 5-foot-tall black apes. I brought myself to full attention and observed both the apes and my surroundings before I began my first dungeon hunt. A single fireball, then a second, a third, and finally a fourth quickly flew toward the two apes. When the first ball of fire exploded on their faces, the apes were already incapacitated and letting out dying screeches. They would not survive after that. A second fireball hit them at the same location, quickly finishing them off. I breathed heavily as I felt the adrenaline course through my body. 2 F-rank monsters were easily taken care of by me. This was a feeling I could get used to. Usually, F-ranked hunters would use their skills sparingly, making sure to cast them all either on the boss monster or in emergencies. I did not have such reservations. I went toward where the apes fell and grabbed a glistening strength core that dropped. It was small in size, smaller than a pigeon's egg, and yet they went for $1,000 on the market. I placed the core into my backpack and ventured further in. I didn't have to walk far, as 3 apes were quickly rushing toward me, screeching after hearing the death screams of their family. Without a thought, I cast one fireball after another. Another strength core dropped from these 3. Cores were not guaranteed to drop every time a monster died, and getting 2 from 5 monsters was already fairly average. Placing the newly acquired cores in the bag, I rushed down the path of the cavern and met another set of 5 apes that I quickly burned. I had to force myself to calm down as I easily and quickly took down the monsters and collected cores. I never imagined myself being able to do something like this, and had to pinch myself a few times just to make sure it wasn't a dream. Forcing myself to remain calm, I cleared the first floor quickly and headed down the winding steps to the second floor. The apes came in batches of 3 and 5 and just ran toward me when I neared. I didn't let them get any closer than 10 feet from me. I hurled balls of fire toward them as soon as they were in my sight. And just like that, an incredulous sight occurred in the F-rank dungeon Ape's Paradise. Without a moment of rest, an F-ranked hunter cleared the second floor, then the third, then the fifth, and then all the way to the end of the 9th floor with ease. I lost control of my emotions as I let out a triumphant shout before the boss room. I had never imagined something like this could be possible. Without a single issue, I had effectively taken down groups of apes, collected multiple cores, and reached the boss room all by myself. I reeled my emotions in as I let out a confident smile. Then I went further down to the boss room. A huge ape awaited me in the circular cave that was the boss room. It roared. The cave shook from the roar. My smile didn't leave my face as 5 fireballs flew toward the ape that was charging at me. The first hit its chest and stopped it on its tracks. The second and third smashed its shoulders and knocked it backward. The fourth and fifth exploded on either side of its head and effectively finished it off. As soon as the ape crashed down, a blinding light flashed in the last room and a green crystal rose in the middle. Touching this crystal would allow you to leave the room and appear at a random location near the entrance of the dungeon. I slowly revealed myself in my first ever completed dungeon hunt, and a solo one at that. I walked toward the now dead ape to see any possible drops. By its side, a few F-rank cores were present, along with a skill book. I grabbed the cores and put them inside the bag before I reached out for the skill book. Minor Heal was now in my hands, and it gave me quite a shock. It wasn't the rarest of F-rank skill books, but it was one of the more expensive ones, as it easily took care of any cuts and minor injuries. I also placed the skill book inside my bag and proceeded to sit down. I thought about it while staring at the green crystal in front of me. The problem at hand was how I should handle myself from now on. An F-rank newly awakened hunter clearing an F-rank dungeon in under 30 minutes was unbelievable. It would usually have to be someone who was B-ranked or above to be able to carry out the same thing. I made sure not to show too much of what I could do when I took the licensing exam, because currently all I had going for me was the fact that I seemed to have a large pool of energy to cast skills. This didn't mean I was powerful, nor did I hold the power of someone ranked B or higher. Even a rank D or C could easily sneak behind me and take me out as long as they were faster than me. So my plan was to stay low-key until I could buy more skills, preferably higher-ranking ones that would match my large energy reserves. And that required money. Another plan was forming in my head, though. Looking over at the gains just from clearing Ape's Paradise once, I had in total 1 F-rank skill book and more than 40 cores from the more than 160 apes I had killed from the 9 floors before. This alone made me bolder to make some accelerated plans. Just from one dungeon run alone, I could make more than $60,000 in under 30 minutes. This alone gave me a great shock. Normal parties would have to split the loot, and it would take them more than 2 hours of intensely fighting monsters in close combat, which brought them exhaustion and made many parties recuperate for a few hours after each dungeon run. Most parties would go into the dungeon once or twice a day. With each person making around $10,000, the life of a hunter could be considered very luxurious. Assuming the boss dropped either a skill book or possibly an item, I could make around 60 grand each run. This made many ideas dance around in my head wildly. I had already spent many months observing hunters and researching the knowledge available to the public about them. I had researched even more into all the known skill books and items that could be dropped from boss rooms. For someone with a large energy pool like me, I already had a few books in mind that would work very well. Of course, I would also have to keep on testing just to see how much focus I actually had. A wild thought kept appearing in my head that I didn't want to entertain as it was too grand. The fact that my focus appeared blank might mean I could repeatedly cast skills without feeling exhausted, thus allowing me to cast skills as much as I wanted. It felt like something had exploded in my head as this idea came, and my mind entertained it more and more. My heart was also beating fast, knowing that this could even be a possibility. Why not? From what I'd seen so far, there was no value for my focus attribute. It made more sense to think that my focus had a really high number I couldn't see, or that because it was blank and I could still cast skills, I could continue casting skills without worrying about depletion. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves before I came up with a new plan. It was somewhat risky, but it would be fast and reduce any possible future problems, whether it be from monsters or hunters. The world after the apocalypse was vastly different, but still the same. Now, it was filled with even more dangers and deaths. A hunter could easily be killed by monsters, robbed by other hunters, or killed by the government if they didn't fall in line. To secure my safety while rising up, I would need a highly defensive and offensive skill, as well as a speed supporting skill. Something of C rank or above would be highly effective, and yet the cheapest C rank skills start off at $500,000. I was going to need a plan, and fast. An idea solidly formed in my head and took root. I knew what I had to do. I didn't want to cause too much commotion, so even though I had to take a roundabout route, I could still dive into dungeons today. The plan was to head to another dungeon after leaving Ape's Paradise. As much as I wanted to enter the dungeon again, I knew I would be easily recognized the moment I headed toward the entrance again. I won't repeatedly dive into dungeons with such a fast speed until I have some measure of confidence to be able to protect myself from most threats. The goal for now was power close to or equivalent to rank B. There was a single B rank hunter in this city, and he was a known celebrity. The strength he showed made many people fearful, as even bullets and snipers were ineffective against someone of rank B. The city I'm in, though, Outer Bank X, was only a small-sized city with a few dungeons, the highest rank being C. Other cities that were further inland had way more powerful hunters with even greater level dungeons. My next stop will be at the rank E dungeon, Frozen Wasteland, which many hunters did not frequent. With the extremely cold characteristics, this dungeon held 20 floors, with various beasts of cold attributes appearing. It should be even easier to clear with my constant casting of Fireball. Before I headed to the Frozen Wasteland, though, I did want to continue testing to see just how many more times I could cast my sole skill, Fireball, at the moment. From the previous 500 times, I'd cast it more than 200 times while clearing this dungeon. Trying to consolidate my thoughts, I moved a distance away from the green crystal and began my experimentation of whether I could endlessly cast skills or if I just had an abnormal amount of focus that I could not see. On the last floor of Ape's Paradise, I continually cast fireballs alone. They exploded a few feet from the final boss, with more following right after. 20 minutes passed. I was still casting Fireball without stopping. It caused my wildly beating heart to be more convinced of that insane idea that I needed to keep going. Approximately over 1,000 casts in the last 20 minutes. I had to keep it up. 40 minutes later, I had gone past the excitement, overcame my fear, accepted the ridiculous idea, and taken it as a fact. This was something out of my wildest dreams, and I didn't even understand how it could be possible. In the last hour, I had cast Fireball over 3,000 times. Not even someone of rank A or the highest known ranking hunter, Steel McHale, would be able to do something like this. This both scared me and gave me a wild hope to someday reach them in rank. Over the span of the time, the balls of fire that came out gradually became more condensed and their explosions more pronounced, as well as traveling much faster. In the last 10 minutes, instead of usually casting one fireball every second, 2 rushed out per second. They were becoming smaller, faster, and more explosive as I continued to cast them. This should be my proficiency rising at a crazy rate because of how many times I was casting the skill. My current panel looked like this. Name, Noah. Occupation, Hunter. Vitality, 10. Focus, blank. Strength, 10. Skills, Fireball. Proficiency, 59. The proficiency for the skill Fireball had amazingly risen all the way to 59, a crazy number to wrap my head around. As far as I knew, there were very few people who had their proficiency higher than 30, as hunters continuously improved themselves and got higher ranking skills with the passing of time. An F-rank hunter using Fireball as their first skill would move on to using an E-rank skill as soon as they gained the funds to buy one. No one spent that much time using one of the lowest ranking skills for an extended period of time. Looking at the high proficiency, it made me excited about what would happen if I continued to cast and raise it even more. The power of the fireball skill should currently surpass any other skills of the next rank in its damage and speed. It was most likely nearing rank D in its offensive ability. I was itching to continue my test of endless casting, but brought myself to a stop and move on to the next plans of my agenda. I moved toward the still glowing green crystal in the middle of the room and placed my hand on it. It instantly teleported me outside the monolith. I appeared not too far from the entrance, with a few people glancing my way with surprised expressions.
Did his entire team get wiped out? Or do we have a ranker here?
Someone said. One hunter scoffed at me.
A ranker? A ranker would never be dressed like that, wearing a flimsy backpack.
A few people noticed the abnormalities as I finished the dungeon and was transported out alone. My current attire really did not match anyone of rank C or higher, and many people were quick to notice. Most of the people that were there an hour and a half ago when I went into the dungeon were either gone or not paying attention, as the surrounding compound of the dungeon was a fairly large space. I ignored the pitying gazes of hunters who thought the rest of my team was gone and headed toward the gate. Funnily enough, I was becoming more and more used to ignoring other people's gazes. Outside the gate, there were a few stalls and people rushing about. I went toward another section where there were a few cars lined up and went to use the hunter ride system. There were many people making their living driving hunters from dungeons to the Awaken Center or to their lodgings. It was a very dangerous job, as you could always have an unstable customer. These were superpowered people who could either blow one up or snap one's neck with a twist of their hands. You had to be careful. One man quickly came up to me with a smiling expression and asked if I needed a ride. I nodded and quickly got into the parked Dodge Charger in front of me. Our destination was the frozen wasteland. In the 25-minute trip toward the next dungeon, I kept on thinking of any things that I missed and went over my plans for the next few days. Time quickly passed and we neared another huge monolith, this one with a slight tinge of orange. Many hunters did not like clearing this dungeon because of the extreme cold, resulting in mandatory cleanup by the government. I would take my time in this dungeon, though, as there were significantly fewer hunters, and even a single run would probably net me more than double the money I made in Ape's Paradise. I paid the high fare and got out of the car. I flashed my hunter license at the guards at the door, who didn't bother with me after giving me a second look and shaking their heads. "Hey, I promise you I'm not just a hunter on a suicide mission, all right?" I said. I looked around the enclosure of this dungeon and headed toward the entrance. There wasn't even a hunter team on standby to enter the dungeon, with a few hunters clustered on some stalls and shops selling food and equipment. I quickly went to the entrance and placed my hand on one of the square doors, which quickly transported me to the first floor of the rank E dungeon, Frozen Wasteland. I was quickly besieged by the cold that drove many hunters away, and quickly cast 2 fireballs that didn't fly away from me this time, but circled around me. Doing this usually required hunters to continuously generate more energy, but I couldn't feel anything like that. As soon as I commanded the fireballs to circle a few feet away from me, the cold air was majorly offset and nowhere near where it was before. There wasn't a pause to be given, though, as I soon heard the growling of animals that quickly showed themselves. White wolves rushed toward me. Their glistening teeth flashed menacingly in the snowy wasteland. I didn't feel any fear, though, as I moved forward confidently. Fireballs were quickly rushing from me at high speeds, exploding the wolves' bodies with impact. I quickly took care of the pack in the first volley of fireballs. After that, all that was left for me was to pick up the cores that dropped. I looked to the misty cold path in front of me as I rushed down this 20-floor dungeon. After all I had been through, I had the sinking feeling that this was only the start of my journey.